I'm going to start out by showing you something that I think some people forget. When you're removing the engine mounts and replacing them in a turbo diesel, you have to raise the engine. And if you're not careful and you raise the engine, this fan can hit the shroud and break the shroud. You don't have to take the shroud all the way off. You just have to pull those two clips and loosen it up so that will float a little bit when you end up jacking the engine up in the air. And there's one other thing you want to do before raising the car up, and that's you want to pull that outer bolt out of the mount. It's easier to get to from the top. And once you dig the rubber away, get some compressed air down in there and blow out the head of that hex bolt. Because you want to make sure that hex wrench gets right down tight in that head of the bolt, or you can have big problems. Of course, you're going to need a long extension. If you don't have a long one, use two. But this is a much easier way to pull those two outside hex bolts out. If you have a long extension with a locking head, that's even better because you're not going to drop that hex socket down in the engine compartment. Since we're working on the lift, we have the advantage of using a transmission jack. You want to use a wide piece of 3/4 to 1 inch plywood to spread out to prevent damage to the oil pan. If you're working on the ground with the car on 4 ramps, you're going to have to use a floor jack, or if you have an engine hoist, you can do it from above to lift the engine up. But we're going to take this engine up only as far as we need to, but before we do that, we've got to loosen the bolts at the bottom of those mounts. The 2 bolts from underneath that go into the motor mount arm are 8mm hex, and you have to be really careful when you pull these out. If you round them out, you got a little bit of a problem. Once we get those pulled, then we got to come around and loosen up these engine shock mounts right here. If you don't loosen these up, you're going to damage them. All right, now this is the next caution. You think you're ready. You've got everything unbolted and you're ready to lift the engine up, whether you're using a jack or a hoist. Give it another look over. See, we just saw something here, right here. It looks like that line for the transmission cooler is going to hit the bracket for the engine shock mount. So we're going to have to remove that little bolt there and drop that down. You need to go completely around the engine and make sure nothing is going to get damaged when you start raising the engine. Oh, we jacked the engine up in the air about an inch, inch and a half, and Jerson just pulled out the left side mount. Look at that. I've seen bad motor mounts before, but this could be the worst. The worst I've ever seen. Look at how it bent up the plate. One of the main reasons these fail prematurely is due to contamination with diesel fuel, diesel purge, engine oil. You have to make sure you keep your mounts clean. And when you're changing your filters, put something over that left side mount to keep diesel fuel from dripping down on it. The other thing that destroys these mounts is a poorly tuned engine. I mean, I hear this on these forums. They say, oh, I bought these mounts, you know, they're no good. They only lasted 3 months. Well, probably the engine was running terribly. Wasn't running on all 5 cylinders. And you saw how old Spence's engine was running when I first got it. It's probably been running on 4 cylinders due to those bad injectors for quite some time. And all that extra shake from a diesel engine out of tune is going to damage these motor mounts prematurely. And I've already told you why you don't want to drive your car with mounts that have completely collapsed like this. You can ruin the connecting rod bearings in your turbo diesel engine if you do that. If you want to cheap out and drive your old diesel around on collapsed motor mounts, just be forewarned. Now, in order to get this mount out, we used a special tool. Justin got it in there and used a special tool to get that inside bolt out. And I'm not going to show it in this video, but when you buy our kit, which now includes these special tools for the old spend specials, the video instructions will show you how to use the special tool that we include in the kit. I'm going to straighten this out. It's not cracked, so I'll be able to reuse this. We'll get the new mount installed, and when he pulls that right side out, we'll take a look at that too. Here's a tip I want to share with you when you get ready to install the new mounts. A lot of times there's a little bit of residual molding rubber in those holes, like over here. Notice how the bolt doesn't want to go in. And before you set that up in there and start these little bolts, you want to clean that excess rubber out of those holes. So Jerson pulled the right side mount out of old Spence, and you're looking at it and saying, well, Kent, that's a lot better. It's almost the same height as a new one. Not so fast. Okay, there we go. Look at that. A wonderful thing indeed. I think this one wasn't even giving any shock either because it was pushed down in there and riding metal on metal. So I think these new mounts are going to make a huge difference. Changing this rear mount's fairly easy. You jack up from the bottom of the transmission pan. You don't even need to take the plate off. If you can get enough height, you just push down and roll that mount out. You take the nut off the top. You take the two bolts off the bottom. Now we'll see if we can get the new one in. Oh, come on, baby Jerson, you can do it. Get her in there. Come on. Maybe. Oh, look at that. All right, now once that's in place, you just put that top nut back on and replace those two 13mm bolts. Lower it down, you're done. Just leave the bolts loose until you lower it down and then tighten up the bolts. The new engine mounts and the new transmission mount are installed. And I thought I would fire this thing up before I do anything else. You know, the next thing is to do a valve adjustment check and rebuild those fuel injectors. But I thought without doing anything else, it'd be great if I just push this thing back, start it up, and let's see how much difference those new mounts make. But right now, before I do that, I want you to look at something. Do you notice anything different in the engine? Look closely at the valve cover and look closely at the angle of the engine in relation to the fenders and the engine compartment. In previous videos, you would look at this engine, it's fairly level. But as you look at it now, you can see it appears to be up in the front. It's a little bit of an illusion because the front of the car is dropping, but it appears the engine is sloped upwards. And this is a really good way you can just visually check your motor mounts. If you look in here and this looks like it's totally flat and level instead of raised up slightly in the front, you probably have collapsed motor mounts. Before I fired the engine up, I decided to go ahead and fix this air cleaner housing situation. I don't want this banging around on there. A couple videos ago, I asked the viewers if anybody knew why these rubber mounts break so often. I've had customers say, oh, I bought those mounts and they only lasted 3 months. Well, can you imagine how long these air filter housing rubber mounts would last on this engine with ruined motor mounts and the engine out of tune? So if you want these mounts to last, make sure your motor mounts are good and make sure your engine is tuned and running properly. We sell a kit with 3 new mounts and locking nuts. I put locking nuts on here, and we also include a new wing nut for the top lid of the air filter housing. We also offer the heat shield separately if you want to add heat shields, because a heat shield around each one of these rubber mounts is going to extend the life of the mount itself. I'm going to take the air filter housing, I'm going to install this and put it back on here so it's not banging around when I start this engine up, so we can really tell how well it's running. I'll pat it on the valve cover. Come on, baby. Now it's time to give it the big test. Oh, no more rattle, no more vibration in the cockpit. Listen to that. Look at the air cleaner housing. A little bit of vibration. You notice it's not perfect. There's a little bit of rock to it, and that might possibly be that issue with unbalanced fuel injectors. So that's why I want to do the fuel injectors next. And then we're going to have to do something about the brakes. There's other things, but I think at this point, fuse box, brakes, fuel injectors, and then we're going to hit the road for some serious road tests. Look at how it stops with authority and no more clunking.